Hi there, welcome to another online RE lesson. This is the last lesson in the topic of Islam practices and actually the last lesson in the whole unit of Islam altogether. So you've done brilliantly to get this far, well done. We're going to look today at the festival of Ashura, the Battle of Karbala, and how it all kind of kicked off a number of years ago, and what predominantly Shia Muslims remember when they mark this festival in the modern day. So this is the festival which is important for both Sunni and Shia Muslims, but it definitely has a larger role in the history, the identity, and in many ways the modern day practices of Shia Muslims. So by the end of today's lesson, we're going to be aiming to be able to describe the events that led to what's called the Battle of Karbala, to explain what happened in that battle, to describe how modern Shia Muslims commemorate that battle during the festival of Ashura, and to be able to evaluate whether or not Ashura can be referred to as a celebration. Okay, throughout this video you're going to notice me trying not to use the word celebrate when talking about this festival, whereas we would definitely use the word celebrate to talk about Eid al-Fitr, and largely celebrate to talk about Eid al-Adha as well. The word commemorate is probably more appropriate for this festival because we are commemorating and not celebrating a battle and the death of a key figure in Shia Islam. Okay, so it's a much more somber day, but it definitely has a debate around it as to whether or not we can call it a celebration. And some people would say it is a celebration, some wouldn't, and then we'll look at that a little bit later. Okay, so here is the family tree of Muhammad. I've turned my camera off for this so that you can see all the text on the screen. There's a lot of words here, I understand that. We don't need to know all of these. They are all obviously important when it comes to the history of Islam, but in terms of our studies of Islam and our studies of the Battle of Karbala and the ensuing festival of Ashura, we do not need to know all of these names. So I am going to highlight for you the ones which I think are going to be the most helpful for you to kind of understand what happened and why. So firstly we have here Prophet Muhammad. We know Prophet Muhammad to be the one to whom the Quran was revealed, the founder of Islam, and he has a daughter named Fatima who marries a man named Ali. Now Ali we know to be the cousin and son-in-law of Muhammad, and also for Shias the rightful successor of Muhammad. So Shias believe that before he died, Muhammad had chosen Ali to be the next leader of Islam after him. We also know though that Sunnis did not agree with this. Sunnis did not think that Muhammad had chosen anybody to be his successor, and therefore appointed a man called Abu Bakr in his place. So the Sunni-Shia split begins with the death of Muhammad and the ensuing kind of argument about who should have been the rightful leader. And the tensions here are existing. They're not, it's not peaceful, but they're not too bad until Ali, later on down the line, is brutally murdered. So Ali is murdered at the hands of a small group of Sunni Muslims, and this enrages the Shias. This enrages them because they feel oppressed, they feel betrayed. The gap, the divide between Sunnis and Shias has grown, and it is becoming quite toxic, and the tensions are beginning to bubble up. Enter a man named Muawiyah. Muawiyah, in an attempt to appease the Shias who are angry at the death of Ali, says and promises that he will not appoint any successor after he dies. So Muawiyah is saying essentially that he will try and allow both Sunnis and Shias to decide the next rightful leader of Islam, rather than it just being a Sunni choice. However, later on, Muawiyah breaks his promise, and his son Yazid becomes the next leader of the Islamic Empire. Yazid is recognized by both Sunnis and Shias to be a brutal, oppressive tyrant. he is seen as deeply corrupt, who built his empire and his status and his wealth on bribery, on corruption, and on the mistreatment of those that he was in power over. On the Shia side, we have a man named Hussein, who is the brother of a man named Hassan, who has also been assassinated. So Hussein has lived through the tyranny of Yazid. He knows what Yazid is like, and Yazid approaches Hussein, asking Hussein to swear allegiance to him. Yazid is aware that he does not have control over a united Islamic empire, and he would like to try and unite the empire so that he does not have the problem of angry Shia Muslims disrupting what he would like to be doing. So Yazid approaches Hussein. Yazid asks Hussein to swear allegiance to him. Hussein, knowing what sort of person Yazid is, knowing that he's corrupt, knowing that he's a tyrant, and knowing that he is deeply unjust, refuses to swear allegiance to Yazid. And this begins the events that lead to the Battle of Karbala, when Hussein, who for Shia Muslims today represents justice, freedom and liberty, stood up against Yazid, who represents injustice, imprisonment and corruption.
Just 48 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, his grandson Hussein was killed in the Battle of Karbala. Why did this battle happen, and why is it so important to Islamic history? After the fourth Caliph Ali was assassinated in 661, a power vacuum emerged, leading to Muawiyah assuming role as Caliph, despite opposition from part of the Ummah who wanted Hassan, son of Ali, who was the grandson of the Prophet, as the Caliph. To avoid further bloodshed after years of conflict, Hassan signed a peace treaty with Muawiyah. This treaty stipulated that Muawiyah would not appoint a successor after him. In the year 670, Hassan was assassinated, leaving his brother Hussein to take on his duties. The treaty was breached when Muawiyah named his son Yazid his successor in 680, beginning the Umayyad dynasty. Yazid spread his power through corruption, bribery, and the use of violence. To legitimize his rule, Yazid demanded allegiance from Hussein. Hussein refused, as Yazid was openly corrupt and known to be brutal. Hussein was forced to flee Medina under threat of imprisonment and assassination. He had received thousands of letters from Kufa, Iraq, pledging support for an uprising against Yazid. Of his refusal to pay allegiance, he said, "I am ready to fight for the sole goal of seeking the reform of the Ummah of my grandfather, the Prophet of Allah. I want to enjoin good and forbid evil." Hussein first went to Mecca for Hajj, but then left to avoid violence and preserve the sanctity of the holy city. Hussein departed with his family and companions to Kufa. In response to the threat of rebellion from the Kufans, Yazid dispatched a governor to Kufa to quash dissent. This led to thousands of Kufans withdrawing their support under threat of violence. As they approached Kufa, Hussein's caravan was intercepted by a battalion of Yazid's army led by a man named Hur al-Riyahi. A greater army which numbered in the thousands, led by Umar bin Sa'ad, joined him and surrounded Hussein's camp in what is now known as Karbala in modern-day Iraq. The army cut off access to water for Hussein and his family, leaving the men, women and children to suffer from days of thirst in Iraq's blistering desert heat. The army demanded allegiance from Hussein, threatening him with death. Despite all the odds, Hussein refused to back down. On the night before the battle, Hussein told his companions that they were free to leave, but they pledged to stand beside him in the face of certain defeat. The following morning, on the 10th of Muharram, known as the day of Ashura, Hussein delivered a powerful speech, reminding the opposition that he was still the grandson of the Prophet and that he still wished to leave. Moved by Hussein's speech, Hur abandoned Ibn Sa'ad's army and joined Hussein's. The battle commenced, with Hussein's 70-odd companions facing off against an army of what many historians number to be 30,000. The companions of Hussein fought group by group and were martyred on the battlefield. Eventually, Hussein was left with a handful of remaining family members. They too were killed. Hussein, now with no one beside him, pleaded with the enemy forces for water for his 6-month-old baby. The enemy responded by firing a fatal arrow at the infant, killing Hussein's child in his arms. Hussein buried the child and bid farewell to the women and children of his camp. He fiercely charged into the battlefield, where, after fighting valiantly, eventually fell from his horse and was surrounded by the enemy soldiers. The grandson of the Prophet was brutally attacked from all sides and beheaded. The enemy forces attacked and plundered the possession of the dead bodies, as well as the camp of Hussein's family. The tents were set ablaze with the women inside, which included granddaughters of the Holy Prophet. The family were taken captive by Yazid's army, later to be paraded to Damascus in Syria. The story of Karbala shook the Muslim Ummah as news spread, launching several uprisings across the Muslim Empire. Many argue that the Battle of Karbala forever changed the course of Islamic history. The day of Ashura is mourned globally by millions of Muslims, both Sunni and Shia, to honor the heroic stand of the Prophet's grandson, Hussein. Just 48 years after the
Okay, what I'd like you to do is I would like you to summarize the events before and during the Battle of Karbala using the video you have just watched. If you need to rewind and watch it again to get the answers to these questions, you are welcome to do that. Pause this video, do whatever you need in order to get these answers, and come back once you have answered all 8 of them. Okay, here is some of the answers to the questions that you have been answering. Again, pause the video, take down what you've missed. Anything that you need to include, please include in green or highlight it to show that it's just additional information that you've included. And then once you've done this, then you may move forwards. Okay, on Show My Homework, you've got a sheet of paper that looks like this. It is a Word document that you can print off, or you can complete it on Microsoft Word itself. The document is entitled The Day of Ashura, Major Shia Festival, and the process by which you are going to complete this work goes like this. You're going to read the whole article through once, okay, the whole thing. Then step 2, you're going to reread the article 1 paragraph at a time. So you only read the first paragraph, and then you do step 3, step 4 and step 5. You then read paragraph 2 and complete step 3, step 4, step 5, and so on and so forth. Okay, so step 3s, 4 and 5 you complete in order for every single paragraph. Step 3 is to write 2 questions in the left-hand column which can be answered by the text in the paragraph. For example, my questions, the first one in yellow, who is Ashura a major festival for? Highlighted the answer in the text, Shia Muslims. In green, what does it commemorate? In the text, it says the martyrdom at Karbala of Hussein. Step 4 is highlighting those answers. Okay, so you see I've highlighted Shia Muslims and the martyrdom at Karbala of Hussein. Make sure that your answers are no more than 5 to 7 words long. This is teaching you to be concise with your highlighting. Do not highlight lots of text thinking that's going to help you. Only highlight what you need. Step 5 on the right hand side is to draw an icon or to write 3 to 5 words which summarize the paragraph that you just read. Okay, that is how you complete this article. Do that fully before you move on to the next step. The next step is looking at the second page of the document, which is asking how is Ashura commemorated by Shia Muslims today? Here you are looking at the 3 kind of main ways that Shia Muslims can commemorate Ashura. So some Shia Muslims remember Hussein's fight against injustice by reenacting plays, and that's plays of the Battle of Karbala, looking at what happened and reenacting the events. Some Shia men remember Hussein's suffering by beating themselves, although this is largely discouraged by Shia leaders. And some Shia people, or Shia Muslims, remember Hussein's message against tyranny by marching in London and other cities, protesting against modern day injustice and modern day terrorism. So for each one, you're looking at what the pros of the response are and what the cons of the response are. So for example, the pros of remembering the fight against injustice by reenacting plays, that kind of stuff would be a pro because you're looking at the history of the event, you're teaching younger children what happened and why it's an important part of history for them to remember. But the cons of the response could be that you are remembering the death of Hussein and remembering the loss of the battle without necessarily looking at what he stood for. So that could be a pro of the right hand column, remembering his marching against tyranny and remembering his fight against injustice. Shia Muslims today marching in London protesting against terrorism very much are highlighting the key message of Hussein and what he stood for and what he lived for. So have a go at this, filling in each box with at least 1 pro or 1 con. And finally, This is where you're going to end today's lesson, looking at whether or not Ashura can be called a celebration. I've given you a couple of hints. I've got 2 questions on the left hand side and 2 questions on the right hand side. So for why it is a celebration, we can look at what Hussein represents in terms of what did he stand for, what kind of life and what kind of example and what kind of world did he want, and why should that be celebrated. Similarly, Hussein was killed, but why should Muslims still celebrate his life? What about his life is worthy of celebration? On the flip side, what happened to Hussein? And what is the appropriate way of remembering this? Well, he was killed in battle. What's the appropriate way of remembering someone who was killed? Is it to celebrate their death or something else? And what do some Muslims do during the day of Ashura, linking to the last task, which is not particularly celebratory behaviour? How can we call it a celebration if, for example, some people, not all, some people whip themselves during the festival? Can we really call that a celebration? Once you've done that, then you are done for the lesson. These pictures are up here simply for you to have a little bit of a focus whilst you're working, so you can keep these pictures up on your screen because you haven't got any pictures in the worksheets I've given you. If you would like to print these pictures off, you're most welcome to. You can stick them in your book as just a little bit of a visual guide for you as well. Have a lovely day.